Today we're going to finish up part 2 of our lesson on our introduction to ancient India. The other day when we went through this lesson, off the top of your head, you should have a really good idea about the introduction to India, how it started, and a couple of those achievements and a couple of characteristics about the Indus River Valley where we actually started. So that's where we started. If you remember, we went from the Indus River Valley to the two cities, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, where we talked about how these cities were built on a grid and so on. We talked about and we looked at a typical home that a person that lived in Harappa would have lived in. We went to the northern part of India and looked at an agricultural region there in the foothills of the Himalayas. The next session of class, if you recall, and off the top of your head, you should have a good understanding of the caste system and how it was such a unique social class system in the history of our world because there are so many different groups of people that were involved in the social class, and also because the warriors were at the top. At the middle part of our lesson the other day, we talked about how the history of India is the history of invasions, and we talked about the different groups of people that went and invaded India over time. And then if you recall, probably the most important lesson that we had to finish the other day in part 1 of this session was our introduction to Hinduism, where we talked about how it itself was a very unique religion and one of the great religions of our world to this day, where we link the past to the present. We finished with the goal of Hinduism, and at the other day, the last thing we talked about was a simple question that needed to be answered. And it had to do with Hindus believing that they go through their normal days, which is filled of sorrow and pain and suffering. And the one question that Hindus ask themselves on a daily basis, and the way that they live their lives, is trying to relieve the suffering, the sorrow, and the pain that is very prevalent, as I say, in our note session. So the other day, we actually answered the question, how do Hindus relieve their suffering and sorrow and pain? And the answer is through reincarnation. Now, reincarnation, once again, just to reinforce this, is the way that people are relieved from their suffering and sorrow. All right? Reincarnation is when basically a person dies, their soul does not die. Their soul lives on and takes the form of another living being. I didn't say another living human being. I said another living being. Hindus believe that here on earth that their existence is ranked. Their existence is ranked not so much because of social class, but because of their fulfillment of their moral duty in life, doing good things, saying good things, and the way that they live their lives. Now, there's two important terms that affect reincarnation, the souls within this reincarnated cycle within Hinduism. One word is dharma. Now, the dharma is what I just talked about. It's basically the fulfillment of your moral duty. It's doing good deeds and so on. So Hindus believe that when you die, your soul lives on and takes the form of a living being. If your soul lives on and you have fulfilled your dharma or your moral duty in this life, Hindus believe that your soul would be placed in a being of an upper class in your next life, in your next what we call reincarnated cycle. You always ask me, well, what is the maximum amount of cycles that a soul can be reincarnated? There's no number. You can't put a number on the number of reincarnated cycles that a Hindu soul goes through. All right, when they finally achieve moksha, when they finally are reunited with that universal spirit that we talked about the other day called Brahma, then the reincarnated cycle ends. Now, the fun part of reincarnation is karma. Now, karma is a word that we've actually heard of before. In fact, I'm sure your parents have used this word for you a few times. If you are going through a bad stretch in life, your grades are not good, you're not performing well on the field or within the band or within the chorus, you're just having a bad week, you're forgetting to do your chores, your friends don't like you, your boyfriend's mad at you, your girlfriend's mad at you, you might be going through something called bad karma. Well, Hindus believe that there are positive and negative forces that affect your current soul, all right, your current existence. And those positive and negative forces definitely affect your moral duty in life. So these two terms play off each other and work together. And finally, once that you have achieved this moksha, then this level of reincarnation ends. All right. Now this diagram does a real good job of showing you the visual of how the cycle of reincarnation works. Here's us on Earth, and there are Hindus that are living in their illusionary world that we mentioned the other day called Maya. And their souls get reincarnated and reincarnated. Their souls are affected by, dharma and karma and so on. And then finally, once their souls are reunited with that universal spirit that resides in all things, Brahman, then the reincarnated cycle of life ends. Now, there's two terms that are associated with this. One I always like to talk about is deja vu. Deja vu is pretty creepy. It's something that we experience if you're walking down the mall with your buddies at the Galleria and you are next to your friends and you're walking in front of the Hollister store and you're getting ready to buy some clothes, and all of a sudden you stop and you're like, whoa, I've been here before. I was with you, and we were in the Hollister store. In the classroom, I would normally ask you to raise your hand and ask if anyone has ever experienced this, and the majority of the hands do go up. It's really weird to us. To a Hindu person, it's probably not that weird because they probably know definitely that they have been in that situation before in a prior life during one of their reincarnated cycles of life. Now, another word that is associated with India and Hinduism is yoga. Yoga is a huge fad. When I was growing up, yoga wasn't even around here where I was living in South Florida. Now there's yoga studios all over the place. It's a widely accepted practice by people. I would normally in the classroom ask you to raise your hand if you've ever done yoga, and a lot of hands go up, and I would ask you, what does yoga include? And it's basically stretching and peaceful. It's a time that you guys usually tell me it's used to relieve stress. Well, ancient Indians invented yoga, and the reason why they did is because they have to answer a question on a daily basis, which, remember, to start this lesson today was, how do Hindu people relieve suffering and sorrow and pain? So yoga would be a definite answer, right, to relieve that stress and so on. And they've been doing yoga for thousands and thousands of years. It's an Indian Hindu thing, which is kind of cool. Now, we're going to switch channels right now, and we're going to talk about a religion called Buddhism. You're probably thinking to yourself, Mr. Hamilton, why in the heck are we talking about Buddhism in an introduction to the ancient Indian civilization? My knowledge of Buddhism has nothing to do with Hinduism or ancient India. Well, let's talk about that for a second. Now, Buddhism, along with Hinduism, is one of the great religions of our world today. It's something that we link from the past to the present. It's still around, and millions and millions and millions and millions and gazillions of people around the world today are Buddhist. Now, you guys know a little bit about this. You know that this was founded by one person, all right? It was founded by Buddha. But one thing that you don't know is Buddha's real name. Buddha's real name is Siddhartha Gautama. Siddhartha Gautama. Siddhartha Gautama was Indian. He was Indian. He was an Indian prince that lived up in the northern part of India in a kingdom that was basically bordering the southern part of the Himalayas there. Now, as a kid, he lived within the kingdom and he never came outside the walls. As he got older, the story goes is that he was married and he had a young child. There was one day that he left the kingdom walls and he had life by his hands. He was a prince. He was going to be a king of an area someday. But he left the walls one day to go to town, and right outside the walls of his kingdom, he saw this old man, this old decrepit man, the story goes, that had open sores all over his body. He was suffering. I mean, he really, really looked like death. And this really hit this young prince named Siddhartha Gautama to the point where he never came back to his kingdom. Buddha and Siddhartha, which go hand in hand, he's known as the Enlightened One. And from that moment in his life, he dedicated himself to answering two questions once he saw this old decrepit man suffering outside his kingdom walls. He roams the Indian countryside for years and years and years trying to answer these two questions. Number one, the first question is, why does suffering exist? Why does suffering exist? He wasn't used to this. He lived within the kingdom walls. He was a prince. He had everything given to him, a young wife, young child. He had the world by the horns. No problems whatsoever. Second question he wanted to answer was, what is the value of life and death? When we talk about Buddhism, you're going to see some similar characteristics to Hinduism. Similar characteristics because Siddhartha was Hindu. that is going to form this great religion called Buddhism. Now, here's where we're going to start to see some similarities, all right? So the goal of Buddhism is to find union with the universe. Buddhists are really into nature. When you see Buddhist monks in Tibet, they're really into the universe. They're really into the physical aspect of our world and so on. Hindus want to find eternal salvation when they unite with the universal spirit called Brahman that resides in all living things. Buddhists go through reincarnated cycles. They go through reincarnation just like Hindus, but they want to find union with the universe. And once they find union and become one with the physical environment, their universe, their cycle of reincarnation ends. As I say, this releases the cycle of rebirth. Now, the final ending point of a Buddhist reincarnated soul when they find union with the universe is called nirvana. Nirvana. For those of you that are into music, that name might sound very familiar to you. It was a famous band when I was in middle school and high school, and your parents have probably told you about Nirvana. So here's Buddha roaming the countryside, going from village to village in northern India, trying to answer these two questions about why does suffering exist and what is the value of life and death. Well, at a certain point, he stops and he finds himself under a tree one day and he starts writing. And literally under the tree that day, he starts writing the framework for the Buddhist religion. And one of the backbone, one of the foundations of the Buddhist religion is something called the Four Noble Truths that he wrote down under a fig tree one day in northern India. The first noble truth in life is that all life involves suffering and sorrow. All right, so there's a very, very similar characteristic to Hinduism. All life involves suffering and sorrow. Here's the second noble truth. A desire for a life of pleasure brings on suffering and sorrow. What Siddhartha, aka Buddha, is trying to say here is that your phones, your Xboxes, your Louis Vuitton purses, your Vera Bradley lunchboxes, all those Michael Jordan shoes and those LeBrons and those $500 pairs of shoes that you buy and that you wear brings you suffering and sorrow in your life. And if you're in the classroom, you look at me and you're like, Mr. Hamilton, I can't live without my phone. I can't live without my Jordans. I cannot live without my PlayStation. And my friends at lunch would not let me eat with them unless I have a Vera Bradley lunchbox. Well, in Buddhism, people do not believe in these pleasurable items because it brings suffering and sorrow. Now, the third noble truth that Buddha said under the tree that day was renouncing these desires will help their soul to achieve nirvana, okay? So renouncing these pleasurable items like your phone and your purses and your shoes would help speed up the reincarnated cycle of Buddhist belief in order to achieve that final union with the universe, which Buddhists call nirvana. Now, the fourth thing that he talked about was the Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path basically is a list of 8 things, 8 ways that Buddhists live their lives. The Eightfold Path, if you follow the Eightfold Path, this will lead you to the renunciation of these sorrowful things and will speed up the process of helping your souls to achieve nirvana. Now, the Eightfold Path basically are a list of 8 things, and I gave you 4 of them just because they're all pretty much the same thing. It's just basically how to live your life, doing good deeds, good views, saying nice things to people, good actions, not lying, not cheating, not stealing, just basically living a good life. Buddhists believe will speed up the process of achieving what we call nirvana. Now, Buddha had a big problem. Remember, he was Indian, okay? Hinduism was well entrenched into pretty much all of India, and it was widely accepted just like it is today in India, where 99% of people are Hindu, all right? It was no different back in these days, okay? So what does he have to do? Well, he's not going to have a very popular following when he tries to move into the Hindu area of the world. So what he has to do is basically take his show on the road. Take his show on the road. So if I asked you right now, off the top of your head, tell me, what are some countries around the world that are Buddhist today? What are some countries around the world that are Buddhist today? You would raise your hand, and the answers usually are very simple. China, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, Indonesia, Laos, all of those kinds of places over in East and Southeast Asia. Well, guess what? When Buddha was starting out, guess where he took his show on the road? He had to go east. And the places that he went were, guess what? He went to Korea. He went to Japan. He went to China. In those days, look at the names. Borneo, Sumatra, Annam, Siam, Burma, okay? Tibet. Tibet is very Buddhist. Mongolia. He had to take his show on the road because there were too many Hindus in India. His religion would never have taken off if he would have stayed in India. So he had to take his show on the road. And that's the influence of Buddha on the world today, where all those places that you're looking at basically on the map east of India are Buddhist today. And that's how it spread. Now, we're going to finish up with some cultural achievements of ancient India. We're going to talk about some stuff that they were really, really responsible for. They improved silk, which they received from the Chinese, which we'll talk about in our reading, in our bell ringer from this morning. Spices, and sometimes during the age of exploration, it's sometimes called the search for spices. Spices that were found in India, which were not found anywhere else on earth, were in huge demand in Europe. So the spices, even to this day, for those of you that like to cook or bake, cardamom, nutmeg, cinnamons, those types of spices that were found in India were extremely, extremely wanted and in demand in Europe. And that starts during this time. India is known for gems. I always like to throw in the concept of polygamy here. I always ask you what polygamists are. Well, it was not achievement, but it definitely is something we're saying that in the Indian culture and the Hindu culture, even to this day, even though it's outlawed, it's still practiced. Polygamy is still practiced. And polygamy is when a man is allowed to marry more than one woman. That's probably why this guy has a smile on his face right here. Now, Indians are known, as far as architecture, for creating dome-shaped shrines. All right, dome-shaped shrines. One of the most famous dome-shaped shrine in the world is the Taj Mahal. It is coincidentally found in Agra, India. Now, for you athletes in the crowd, all the domes that we have, the Superdome and all the new football stadiums that are and baseball stadiums that are being created, that has a dome that is inspired by Indian architecture. I don't know if you guys know this, but every single capital city in the United States has a dome-shaped building in the middle of the capital of the city, whether it's Tallahassee or Atlanta. Many of them, if you've seen, are golden. And there's a golden dome that is on top of these capital buildings within the capital cities of the cities within the United States. All right, dome-shaped shrines inspired by Indian architects. Now, for you math folks in the crowd, the Indians really helped with Arabic numbers and invented negative numbers. So if you guys are dividing and multiplying negative numbers or negative fractions, you can thank the Indians for that right now. They were fantastic mathematicians, all right? So Arabic numbers, negative numbers. For you science people in the crowd, they didn't actually name the planets on Earth, but they said a very, very thousands and thousands of years ago, just by doing math, that there's 7 planets in our solar system, 7 of them, okay? That's not bad for coming up with that concept without telescopes, without having any way to view this, all right, just by using mathematics and so on. For you doctors in the crowd, ancient Indians were doing plastic surgery thousands and thousands of years ago. Now, it's not like the plastic surgeons that we're talking about here in the United States and around the world today. They were doing skin grafts to help burn victims. So for you doctors in the crowd, or you want to be a doctor or a nurse someday, the Indians were really, really the first plastic surgeons on Earth. And they were setting broken bones thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, just like the way that we set bones today with casts and so on. So from a